What is going on, Allegiant fam? My name is Corbin. I am the head strength coach here at Allegiant Gym South Bay, and today we've got our Block 6 Ask Me Anything. Thank you to everybody who took the time and submitted questions. Let's dive right into those questions. The first question asks whether or not we here at Allegiant do specific mobility, agility, and strength training for MMA or kickboxing specifically. If that is your goal, whether it be any type of MMA, kickboxing, jiu-jitsu, any combat sport, or if you have a very specific goal oriented around a particular event or a sport, then what's probably going to be best for you and where we're going to be able to customize that program the most is going to be with our personal training. With our personal training, you're going to get a one-on-one coaching, a specific custom program to your needs and your abilities. So what that means is that you come in, you'll do a consult with one of our coaches. During that consult, we're going to take you through all of our VOD data. So our ForceDecks, our NordBord, our DynaMo. We'll assess all of that information as well as a functional movement screen. That'll give us some constraints for how well you move and to let us know what we should or should not do with you. And then we take that information along with whatever your goals are. And in this case, that could be specifically oriented around kickboxing or MMA, or if it was to climb a particular mountain or whatever your goal may be. And we write you the best program that we can, given those two kind of potentially opposing things, your restraints and your goals. And we write you that custom program, and then you come in at your chosen frequency, which will kind of give you a recommended frequency, whether that be 3 or 4 days a week. And that'll depend on the amount of time that you have to train, meaning is this a goal where we're 6 months out, 12 months out, etc. And if it's probably a little shorter term goal, like a 3 or 4 month goal, then we will probably need to train more, 4, maybe even 5 days a week. And we'll write you a custom program, and then you have a coach that's dedicated to your hour working with you in that one-on-one session, making sure that you're using the right technique, making sure you're using the appropriate intensities or the appropriate weights, making sure that your range of motion is perfect. So that's what you get out of that personal training. And in regards to that compared to our group classes or our group programming, we can think of our group programming like a bell curve, where we're trying to hit that 80% of people. And if you have a very specific goal, you're probably in the 10% where that's either going to be too much. And in that case, maybe you're training to run a marathon and or a triathlon, and your volume outside of the gym is really high. And we need to find ways to kind of scale back your volume in the gym. Or maybe it's the 10% of people where the team or the strength programming is not going to be enough. And that's going to be like, hey, if you are training for bodybuilding or powerlifting or something like that. Do I think that as far as our program goes for your kind of everyday recreational kickboxer, MMA athlete, I think you could probably get away with team or strength and do just fine as long as you are practicing those skills outside of sport. But if you were looking for a program very, very specific to that sport, Allegiant personal training is going to be the way to go. My next question asks what we do with all the data that we gather from ForceDeck, NordBord, and DynaMo. So we just finished our analytics challenge. It was a huge success. We had a bunch of people sign up for it. We had a bunch of people complete it. So that was trying to get one test of each one of those tests in each week. So getting one ForceDeck jump, 1 rep on the NordBord, and 1 rep on the DynaMo for the last 3 weeks for 4 consecutive weeks. And what we're going to do with that data is, number one, we have VOD going through and creating normative data for us. So if I'm a male in my 30s or 30 to 35, I should be able to see how my data and my scores on those 3 assessments compare to other members like me at the gym. And that's really cool, because the only other organizations out there that have that type of data or even have enough information to make that kind of normative data is big major league sports organizations like the NFL and the NBA and the MLB, those type of organizations. So to have Allegiant and the brand up with those type of organizations is really cool. And the other thing that we can do with that information is we're looking to put systems in place to where we can kind of track that data, and I can say, okay, Corbin has had his jump performances down. Maybe that's worth a reach out, but we can talk about recovery, we can talk about consistency, maybe getting on nutrition blueprint or how many times you're coming in. All of that stuff, and hopefully it's just a trigger that helps us help you kind of optimize the Allegiant training program. The last thing I'll say about using the vol data is that you always get your top score. So if I take 3 counter movement jumps, the coach should be giving you your best jump out of the day. And what you can do with that information is you can plug that into Bridge. So once you plug that into Bridge, you should be able to see every other time that you've done a counter movement jump here at Allegiant. And what you should start to gather is, hey, on these days that you're under recovered, so you're tired, your fatigue is high when you fill out your wellness questionnaire, and maybe you're underslept, or your sleep quality wasn't good, all of that type of stuff, you should see a corresponding, hey, my jump performance is down. And what that should hopefully start to trigger for you is that, hey, today's maybe not the optimal day. It's still important to come in and get a workout in, but say it's week 4 and we're feeling really, really beat up, maybe we drop the weights back down a little bit and go to our week 2 or week 1 weights because we know the performance isn't gonna be there because we're not jumping at our highest height or our highest RSI. All of that stuff can be a good fatigue or readiness indicator for us. So hopefully that allows you to start making some better decisions as well as creating a trigger for us to be able to help you. So the next person clearly sat down and kind of mapped out Allegiant's training program and provided a very detailed statement as well as a follow-up question. So to kind of lay out the picture for us, let's assume that practice 1 is on Monday, practice 3 is on Wednesday, and then practice 2 is on Friday. That's week 1. Now to the following week, we're gonna come back on Monday and hit that practice 2 again. And then on Wednesday, we're gonna hit practice 1. And then on Friday, we're gonna hit practice 3. So this person points out that first of all, we have the same training program back to back on Friday and Monday. So if you're training Monday, Wednesday, Friday, like the majority of people do, you only get 2 days off between those in my hypothetical situation, practice 2. This has always been a complaint or a sticking point with especially week 3 going into week 4, or even week 2 going to week 3, when a lot of times that is practice 1 going into practice 1 again on Monday when people are still relatively sore, even coming out of those couple of days off. The other thing that this person pointed out, which takes a little bit more homework on this person's part, is that potentially the practice 3 that we did week 1 on Wednesday, we don't do again until Friday the following week. So there is technically 9 days in between, which might seem like a really, really long time. So let's break this down. First of all, in a hypothetical world, if we are always doing our practice 1, our squat day on Monday, and we're getting this assumption, this assumes we are training Monday, Wednesday, Friday. So let's say we always do practice 1, our squat day, or our squat heavy day, the day we put our most emphasis on our squatting pattern. On a Monday, after 2 consecutive days off, that means that our best workout of the week is always going to be our squat day. So in my experience, what tends to happen is that our squat becomes our best lift, we become a little bit anterior chain dominant. We're not practicing good structural balance there because that's always our freshest day. If we come in off of a really good weekend worth of sleep, we focused on recovering, we behaved well, we ate well, we got our 8 hours of sleep, we're always gonna feel the most fresh coming in on that Monday. And over time, we accumulate a bunch of really good practice 1s, a bunch of really good squat days, and everything on our practice 2 and practice 3 on Wednesdays and Fridays deteriorates because we're training them at a below optimal level or in a fatigued state. Since all 3 days are total body lifts, those days aren't going to be as good. So it's important to have a little bit of rotation within the program so that we're not always training those specific practices on specific days. So the same thing goes for that. I think in my scenario, it was practice 3 on Wednesday of week 1, and then practice 3 on Friday of week 2, where we have that 9-day gap. If that day, practice 3 typically tends to be our hinging day, so some type of a RDL or deadlift variation. That long of a time span in there, especially on a heavier lift like deadlift, but we could say the same thing even for something like pull-ups, having that length of time in between workouts should say, hey, we are definitely recovered and ready to train this muscle group really, really hard again that following session. So really the key here is making sure that one, on the weekends, you are spending time trying to recover and you're not being a ding dong and going out and doing things like drinking or eating like a child that are going to hamper your recovery, but also you are getting your 8 hours of sleep, you're getting enough water, you're eating your fruits and vegetables, all of these things that we talk about all the time, so that from Friday to Monday, you can optimally recover. And there is definitely good research out there that Friday to Monday, that 72 hours is enough time where if you are putting a little bit of thought into your recovery, you should be okay and ready to train again by Monday. So when it comes to that 9-day gap, again, say that we are on our hinge day on practice 3, just because our next practice 3 is not going to be until the following Friday with that 9-day gap, it doesn't mean we're not going to hit some type of posterior chain or some type of hinging pattern on Friday, Monday, and Wednesday as well. So it is all total body lifts. And with that, we should be able to get enough, if we're training at a high enough intensity, we should be able to get enough fatigue on those 3 days in between that we're not so worried about that 9-day gap. So optimally speaking, I think that this is probably the best way to run the program to guarantee that we kind of cycle through those practice 1, 2, and 3, the main movement patterns in those 3 days: squat, upper body pull, and then a lower body pull and some type of hinging pattern. This is the best way to cycle through those 3 so that we're sometimes training them under high fatigue, sometimes training them under low fatigue, and sometimes training them under moderate fatigue. Or said a different way, sometimes training them when we are the most fresh, moderately fresh, and least fresh. Another class-based question here. This person requests that we take practice 4 and we make it all focused on hypertrophy. And the reason that they give for asking this question is that they don't see the point to the 20 minutes of conditioning at the end of practice 4. And so I would say, I understand where this question is coming from. You're probably not working hard enough in that conditioning session. So what people ask all the time in these AMAs is, what can I do for my conditioning outside of the gym? And I always say zone 1, zone 2 cardio. Go for a hard walk, go for a hike, go for a ruck, maybe go for a run, a bike, maybe swim. Something that you can do over a long period of time that gets your heart rate into those zone 1, zone 2s, thinking 50-60% of max heart rate. Now, when we think of our practice 4 and the conditioning involved in that class, we're probably thinking a little bit more of high intensity conditioning work, where we're thinking zone 3, maybe even zone 4. For some of us who are either not in as good shape or are a little bit more fast switched, we might even start hitting a little bit of zone 5. In that case, 20 minutes once a week is probably plenty. I would say that for the everyday person walking around, we probably don't have the adequate conditioning levels to recover from one of those high intensity sessions more than once a week anyway. So getting in 20 minutes of, hey, trying to get up into zone 3 or zone 4 on that conditioning work is probably the perfect amount. Anything more would be really hard to recover. Again, I just answered a question about the Friday to Monday turnaround. If we're adding a practice 4 in on Saturday or Sunday and you want more conditioning at that high level of an intensity, we're definitely not going to be recovered by that following session on Monday. And again, even practice 4, with it being upper body oriented in the beginning, is still pretty total body when you look at it from a overall perspective on a 10,000 foot view. So from a recovery standpoint, we probably don't walk much longer than 20 minutes. And my guess is that the person asking this question, no insult intended here, but we're probably just not training hard enough during that conditioning period to have it really get your heart rate to the spot that it should be. That should be probably the one time a week that you want to do that. And if you're not getting up and outside of zone 2, I could see why you're asking for more hypertrophy and less conditioning, because you just don't think it's that hard. Push yourself, grab a heavy med ball, grab a heavy kettlebell, grab a heavy club, see how high you can get your heart rate, and then see during those rest periods how high you can get it back down. Kind of piggybacking off that question, this next question regards the team program specifically, and they made a statement that the B-Series in this block is a little bit jumbled based on the availability of equipment. So we have a tri-set in the B-Series. A tri-set is 3 exercises paired together at once. And a couple of days, like for example, one day I know that there's a kettlebell front squat as well as a kettlebell deadlift paired up. So we're using a lot of the kettlebells, and this person is saying that there's a log jam with the equipment there and it makes it difficult to roll through the session. My advice to you, and this person is asking for my advice in that type of situation, would be to rest more. So I've got 3 exercises and I've got no more than 3 people to a rack at a busy class. So what this probably means is that we're gonna have to stagger who's going when. So person number 1 is gonna start off on the front squat. Once they go from the front squat, they're gonna go to the bench. Once they go from the bench, they're gonna go to the deadlift. And then from there, they're gonna rest. The next person's probably gonna start. We might be able to figure out a way where somebody starts every time somebody hits the bench in the middle of that pair. But at the end of the day, just because it's the B-Series doesn't mean that we should not be taking rest. At least down here in the South Bay, we're still finishing a little bit early during our classes. So taking more rest is gonna allow you to load a little bit heavier. And again, this piggybacks off the last question because this isn't, practices 1, 2, and 3 aren't necessarily for your conditioning levels. They're strength training. In order to strength train, you have to take some rest in between sets. So having one person roll through that B-Series at a time is not going to hurt your strength gains. It's not going to hurt your muscle growth. It's going to allow you to use heavier weights. And if you're still finishing within the hour, then it should really be a non-issue. It might not feel as hard at first because you're using weights that you could use and not take a rest in between those 4 sets. But now that you are taking a rest, you should be able to go a little bit heavier, and that should increase your perceived level of exertion. So my recommendation for how to make that flow more smoothly is to take more rest. This next question talks about specifically a exercise in the team program on practice 3. So we've got post-fatigue this block, meaning we're gonna start with one movement that's probably going to be a compound multi-joint movement that's high threshold, meaning we can really load it up, followed by more of a single joint or a lower threshold movement in the B-Series, looking to continue the set of the same muscle groups being worked, just at a lower intensity to really increase the amount of time under tension. So in practice 3, we have a block deadlift working on a heavy hinging pattern and a shortened range of motion, going into a seated dumbbell good morning with in a lengthened position. So that hamstring's kind of already on stretch, and it should be a lot lighter because we're using dumbbells. But you're already, this gets into the question, you're already kind of in a pre-lengthened position. So this person states that they don't like the dumbbell good morning because for them, they are a shorter person with a good hip mobility, and so they just end up touching the dumbbells to the floor every time. But they do also bring up that, you know, they see a lot of taller people with longer arms who are also getting to the floor every time. They also are maybe seeing not perfect technique or rounded backs, et cetera, et cetera. So with this question, there's a lot to unpack. So first of all, we've never done this movement before. And anytime we introduce a new movement into a program, it's good to not make judgments off of the first week. Because, you know, say like, hey, when we do some type of a squatting pattern, some type of a hinging pattern, some type of single leg squat, like a split squat, or, you know, whatever it might be, for a lot of times, especially in our team classes where the trainees are a little bit more advanced, they may have been with Allegiant for a while, they've seen all of these movements before. So we can kind of just roll the balls out and let the kids go play, so to speak. And that, you know, even on week 1, those movements end up looking pretty good. Not to say that those movements don't look even better by week 4 after they've had 4 weeks to accumulate some practice, even though we typically have more load on those movements on week 4 as well. With the dumbbell good morning, we've never done this in our group classes before. So it's kind of assumed that week 1 might not look perfect. A lot of people still figuring out the movement. So if you're seeing what you determine to not be perfect technique, there's a difference between perfect technique and at-risk technique, and that's not really for you to decide. That's for the expert in the room to decide. So let the coach do their job, and if that coach is determining that that person's not at risk and they just need more practice with that movement, or maybe need to go lighter or something like that, leave that up to the coach to decide without you making any preconceived judgments off of what you think may or may not be correct for that movement. Secondly, as far as different limb lengths and things like that, in your case in particular, or this person's case in particular, we can kind of vary the height that we're seating at. So if we are shorter with good hip mobility, or if we are taller with good hip mobility and have longer arms, maybe the solution is to sit on a few RX pads and elevate our hips a little bit so that we can reach down a little bit further. Another good option here is I want to think chest up and almost reach my chest away from the bench instead of reaching hips or chest down towards the floor, right? So my goal, and again, what this should be is if I've got my legs out straight and my hamstrings are already on length just sitting in this position. For me, I'd say I have good hip mobility, not great hip mobility, but if I just straighten my legs out here in kind of this pancake or straddle sit position and sit up nice and tall, tilt my pelvis forward, then I already have a little bit of a hamstring stretch, and as I start to go down, I really feel that hamstring stretch already. So if that's the case, we might just need to elevate the hips a little bit more. Think a little bit more anterior pelvic tilt, so try to lift your tailbone away from the bench. A cue I really like to use here that I stole straight from the FRC people is if there was a fish hook in your belly button and somebody was pulling you forward, how would you go to that movement? If the camera was pulling that fish hook forward from my belly button, I wouldn't fold down to the floor. I'd try to come towards that camera. And that's what we're looking for out of that hinge pattern. Our hips aren't gonna go anywhere. I can't say hips back like I would on a traditional RDL pattern, but by tilting the pelvis, lifting that tailbone, and coming forward, I can get a really good stretch in the hamstrings. Now the dumbbells are still gonna go down towards the floor, but from a spinal position and a pelvic position, that's really what we're looking for out of that movement. So it might help to stack our hips up just a little bit higher so we don't end up hitting the floor. I can definitely empathize with the taller person with longer arms who's hitting the ground. Again, I don't think my hip mobility is great, but that's a solution I found, is just elevating the hips a little bit on a few RX pads. So that would be my suggestions for trying to improve our technique or improve our range of motion on the seated dumbbell good morning. The last question asks Kendrick or Drake. This is a few weeks old now. It's crazy to think that this dispute between these two musicians is already over, but Kendrick. All right, everybody. Thank you guys for tuning in. Appreciate everybody who asked questions. That was block 6. We'll see you guys next month for block number 7. Corbin out.